Good afternoon. Let's give it about another 20 seconds. I still see some folks filtering in. All right. Welcome. I'd like to welcome the audience to our third session in our Digital Transformation Now webinar series. Today we will be covering why digital transformation gives enterprises a competitive advantage. I would like to remind the audience that eligible North America attendees will receive a free Amazon gift card per each session that you attend live. That's correct. You will have to hang out with us for the full 30 to 35-minute session in order to receive that card. I'm Miranda Burke, and I'm the Senior Programs Marketing Manager here at S&P. A couple housekeeping items. This session is being recorded, and everybody will receive the link to the recording at the end. Questions can be asked at any time via the chat function on the side of your screen. And towards the end of the session, we will be launching a poll question, so your engagement is encouraged. Introducing this dynamic duo, we have Alexander Greb from Westminster Consulting, formerly SAP. He started at Westminster Consulting. We also have Dr. Steele Arbini. He is the Chief Technology Officer at S&P. Now, I am going to introduce, hopefully a familiar face for everyone that's attended the first couple sessions, is my colleague Darren Shaw. He was in the lead for the first and the second session, so he is going to give a quick rundown of what we covered in the first session before we pass it off to Steele.
Darren? Miranda, thank you. Thank you so much as always, Miranda. Yes, welcome everyone. So for those of you who attended the first two sessions, this will be somewhat familiar. For those who were not able to attend, let me please give you a real quick overview and then turn over to my esteemed colleagues. So session one, we talked about the digital core and identified the fact that there were a variety of definitions. But at the end of the day, the digital core is the strategic foundation upon which your company's digital ambitions are realized. Most of the time, the core is defined in a technical manner. SAP users, the discussion about your future core, if you're running ECC or prior versions, would be S/4HANA, a system that is built for digital business and a system that is built to integrate emerging and proven digital technologies. Now, when we talk about the foundation of digital ambitions, well, what are digital ambitions? So in the second session, I talked about digital transformation was the title, but when you really peel it back, digital transformation was used in too much of a broad umbrella. Now, one's digital ambition, the digital ambition for your organization actually has three components to it. Digital transformation, which is typically the front-end transformation. So how am I going to issue new products and new services using the most flexible platform possible to satisfy the needs of that digital market? I used Uber as a very simple example. Now, digital business optimization is what's where the company looks at the back office. So given my business transformation goals, right, my ambition to be a digital service provider, a digital product provider, what has to change in my mid and back office to support the ongoing transformation and the ongoing service of my new digital customers? And that's consolidating systems, optimizing those systems, putting them into the cloud, making sure that they are your proper interconnection between those key applications. Saving money to invest that money into your business transformation, and then underlaying that, it's okay, what are the technologies most applicable to my company, my industry, and my business needs, and are they compatible with my current systems, but more importantly, are they going to be compatible with that new digital core? The whole point of moving to a digital organization and having a digital ambition is to become a data-driven decision-making organization. What does that mean? It means no hippos allowed. What is a hippo? It is the highest paid person in the office, which tends to make decisions. And since there are 180 noted personal biases that can influence any decision we make on a day-to-day basis, having a data-driven decision-making organization is going to provide you with better insights and proactive and predictive data to help you make those critical decisions for the direction of your organization and obviously for the satisfaction of your customers. That's what we covered. And now I turn over to my friends Alexander and Steele. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Darren, for that great intro. No, Darren, I mean, I think those points were right on. It's all about measuring in order to gain improvement. And that's the reason why, right? That's why we do this, because we want to gain those improvements. You know, many organizations lament some of the problems that they might have, like, oh, we have low order entry this quarter. And I'll just use that because it's the end of September, it's the end of the quarter. That's probably what a lot of organizations are thinking. But if you're only looking at that at the end of the quarter or at the end of the year, there's not much you can do about it on September 30th, right? Because the quarter's over already. Except like yell at everybody, come on, get that last deal. But that's really not it. So I think digitalization, as Darren was talking about, and I know Alex is going to talk about, can help you react to that throughout the quarter and the year so that you're not surprised with it at the end. Is that the way you see it, Alex?
I absolutely agree. And I would say and that would be like my 5 cents to that point. If you look into what's basically necessary, or what kind of attitude is necessary to gain what you were referring to, is when I'm asked what's digitalization all about, or what the major paradigm of digitalization is, then it's to be able to do things you were not able to do before. Because so many digitalization initiatives I have seen in the last, let's call it 5 years, quite jumped not far enough, because they are just trying to achieve, like, continuing doing the same thing they did basically all over again, but a bit better, because they are now on a new platform, they are faster, it's maybe a little bit more colorful, but in a way they continue doing the same old things. And this is for my opinion, what's very important if you want to measure that kind of success of your digitalization initiative. Am I now really able to do things I were not able to do before?
No, it's a good point. And I think that's what we want to do, right? We have coming in or out of a pandemic. I'm not sure, given the way the numbers are going, but I think the screws are on everybody to really squeeze that last bit of optimization, right? There's only so much costs you can cut, so much internal things you can optimize. You have to look for more. And I believe this is a way to find some of that. There are organizations that are saving, 10% across the board and more through initiatives like this. So there's real money to be made, and it certainly, if done properly, can be self-funding. And I know, Alex, you have some, big 3 points you would recommend to our viewers that they undertake if they're contemplating becoming a digital business. What would maybe don't give us all 3 at once? We can, because then everybody would just end the meeting. But how would we start introducing those into the discussion?
I would say, like, when you look into the internet, everybody has these kind of top 3 or top 5 or top 10 videos and so on, because that's, let's say, a structure which is entertaining. So that's what we decided, okay, we will do this for this event also. And what are the top 3, let's call it, best practices of best-in-class digitalization adopters? Then I would start with my personal number 1, and it is treated as a business topic, not as an IT topic. Because so many digitalization initiatives that have turned out, let's call it, mediocre in its output, are the one where they are driven mostly just by IT, and sometimes they had, let's say, you are seeing that maybe IT was doing it for themselves. They were doing it just as, let's say, as a technical migration, why any business benefits remained out, and say like, okay, we first want to do it, let's say, on a technical basis, and then later on, after the go live, for example, or after the migration, after we put the old wine in new bottles, then we will go together with the business into the benefits. And from my experience, it does not really work out. It's the same like when you say on New Year's Eve, I will stop smoking, or I will do sports and so on. How often were you really successful when you did that? Most of the times it did not turn out like that. And the troubling thing for me is, by doing that, first doing a technical migration by really taking everything what they have right now, all the legacy process, into the new system, they also transfer the limitations of the old technology, of the old systems, into the new world. Because why did you work in your legacy system the way you did? Not because you wanted it, and not because of any, let's call it, industry requirements or whatever. You worked that way in your legacy system because that was the only way the limitations of that legacy technology allowed you to do. And by taking over your legacy processes to 100%, you are taking over these limitations where they basically do not exist. So that's why I'm always saying, like, come from the business side, look at your strategy, think of it, what you may have to be in 3 to 5 years, try to derive the capabilities you need to make this kind of strategy real. And when you are aligned with your stakeholders on those capabilities, then we can come up with, let's say, an architecture of solutions that in the end enable you to have these kind of capabilities that in the end will make your strategy come true.
No, I think it's a great point, because in many cases you see some of these technologies used improperly just allow you to make more mistakes faster.
Yeah.
And that's certainly not the way to do it. You know, an example I always like to give, and I know you know what I'm going to say now, is, I like to run. And anybody out there that runs realizes it's a very challenging sport, and you certainly very often reach a plateau that is very difficult to break through. And what I found that works for me is this little Garmin, and I'm not plugging Garmin, watch right here. It's not the fancy Apple one, because I can't charge it every day. But this, and I have a regular watch also, right? But this is the one that I really use, right? This is for fashion. This is for real use. And what I found is that if I can monitor my heart rate when I run, and just pick a number, let's say 165, when I run and my heart rate drops below 165, I know I need to add more, strength to my exercise. And with that method, I'm always improving, because your body gets more conditioned, so your heart rate drops a little bit. Then you add a little more exertion, you get back up to 165, you get used to it, and you drop down a little bit, then you add more. And this is the trick that I've found to continually improve. I can look at my pace, I can look at all of that, but it doesn't help me, because in a lot of ways it's a lagging indicator. And this brings me to maybe my first 2 points. Number one, start measuring. But then the question is always what to measure, right? I have so many metrics that I can measure. Well, look for a leading indicator, not a lagging indicator, meaning something that I know I can change, that I can move the needle on, that will then give me the result I want. I want to run fast, I want to run better. Looking at my pace doesn't help me, because I don't know if I'm building my conditioning. But I know if I look at my heart rate, I can influence that by running faster. And then I know I'm going to get stronger. And it's the same thing in business. Take that order entry example. I can measure that. But is it really helpful? Because then I'm just looking at order entry. I'm behind my target. What do? I tell my salespeople, go sell more stuff, right? That's not so good, because it's after the fact that I know that. And then I find myself in September 30th and I didn't make my number. Not the right way. But if I know that closed deals is influenced by, let's just say, the number of contracts that I have out there. Well, if I can increase that, then I know I will increase more deals. So that becomes my leading indicator that I can measure, and I can get these numbers even out of Salesforce right now if I'm looking at it correctly and entering the data correctly. And I know if I can drive more proposals, then I should drive more closures, so I can drive that number and hopefully get better results, which is the number I'm really looking at, which is my quarter end order entry, for example. So those would be my 2 cents. Certainly start measuring and look very carefully for those leading indicators, things that you could influence now that would give you the result you want later. Don't drive looking through the rearview mirror, right?
Absolutely. And or let's say you just makes sense when you're driving backwards. And this is what we really should keep in mind. My second one I decided to bring up was when you digitalize, when you do this kind of transition, divide commodity processes and differentiating processes, because it makes sense in basically anything that you do. First, why? Because it's quite easy. Commodity processes, those are the ones which you were talking about measuring, which you measure for efficiency. Yeah, commodity processes that you do not want them to cost very much. They just have to run. They have to run. You have to rely on them, you want to run them with, let's say, the least amount of possible cost, because you want to excel in a different way in the differentiating processes. Why the differentiating process is so important? Because those are the one where you should measure them for effectiveness. Those are the processes where basically the customer decides if he buys from you or if he does not buy from you. And those are also the processes where most of your, let's call it, competition or your strategy attacks on, because that's what makes you. It's not the commodity processes, because like, I guess your company and my company were working probably 100% the same in your and my commodity processes. But in our differentiating process, it might be completely different because you have a little bit of a different business model than us. So making that gives you a hint on how to attack these kinds of both sides, because commodity processes, you want to bring the bottom line down. That gives you a lot of hints, for example, what kind of technologies, for example, you use when you want to improve these kinds of processes. You use automatization like process robotics and so on to become better there. In the effectiveness measured differentiating processes, things are a little bit different there. You want to raise the top line there. So those are the ones, the process where that's where you really want to keep out the game. That's where you do and try out the new business models. That's where you have your customer-centric processes that give you access into these kinds of success. So making these distinction and putting a map and really helps you to excel and to be better after this, because you know which kind of process you are attacking with what. I have, for example, seen customers who were mixing that up a little bit, and they were, for example, running insight to action or trying to run insight to action capabilities in their commodity processes, and they found out it does not make me better. It does not make any sense at all. So do this kinds of map, like commodity processes on the one side, differentiating processes on the other side, then you know how to attack and how to improve these kinds of dimensions.
Now, good insight, because it's that age-old discussion about do we want to improve the company or do we want to improve the business? And the company is those things that everybody must do, the so-called 5 things. You got to pay your vendors, get paid from your customers, do your taxes, your regulatory things, right? Everybody does that, and as you said, they're all the same. And there's a common metric out there that says any given business process is usually 70% of the time in a waiting mode. It's not doing anything. It's just waiting for whatever is the next input that it gets. And even to pull back those numbers of how much time is any given process or category of process, like you said, the commoditized ones, spent just simply doing nothing, is a great insight. And I bet you that's a great place for your RPA, robotic process automation, as well. Certainly if you're blowing up all that time there, right?
Absolutely, yeah. And what also goes a little bit into that kind of game, this helps you not to more or less over focus on efficiency, because that's for example, what happens, and then we are like on my first step again, when you, for example, drive these kinds of initiatives too IT-ish, because that's a problem what, for example, the role of the CIO quite often has. The CIO is measured in most of the cases for efficiency, not for effectiveness. Yeah. In the worst case, he's a cost center. So basically, he's measured after this, are the things more cheap when he's done with his stuff. One proof for that thesis is, for example, why are there CDOs? The CDO is the for effectiveness rated twin brother of the CIO. So this is something what quite often happens. So CIOs are sometimes a little bit struggling to get out of that. And if you do these kinds of, if you divide commodity processes and different trading processes, you balance this out and you take care that your initiative does care for both topics in that case.
Sure. And I think that ties in with what would be my next point, right? When you drive it to IT, right? IT people, they're going to come up with 1,000 metrics. And maybe they're all forward looking, as I said earlier, it could be. But once you get 1,000 metrics, like where do you start, right? Do you work on all of them or a lot of them? This is very dangerous, I believe. And a lot of organizations want to do that because they say, oh my God, look at all these places we can improve. What I'll tell you is that, instituting many of those improvements can be very expensive and time consuming and take a lot of effort and cause a lot of disruption, right? People are going to change the way they do things and they may not like to, and there's always cultural issues and so on, that if you take on too much, you run a very dangerous risk of not getting enough output, enough benefit, and then the naysayers can easily say, oh, this doesn't work anyway, this is a failure, let's go back to the old way, or this was too much waste of money, let's cut costs in this area, and you'll be the first thing to get cut. It's much better, I believe, to identify a small set of things you can improve and really try to move the needle on just those. Because once you can improve a little bit, that first iteration is always the most difficult. And then when you go around the second iteration, it's a little bit easier. And the third iteration becomes a little bit easier even still. And then you start producing some kind of measurable results, right? Now the digital business is now confirming that, this adoption of measuring the contract pipeline as opposed to the order entry pipeline is effective. And if we push there, we get the outcome we want. You start seeing improvement. And now what? Everybody wants to be part of the winning team, right? So now people are going to want to be part of that and help with that and drive that even more, and you'll get even more adoption, and then you'll have enough success to move on to the next one. As opposed if you diluted your effort over, whatever number, 10 of them or 5 of them even, that you can't have enough focus to address one of them well, you can't achieve anything. So I think really at that point, especially in the beginning, focus is very, very important, and try to move the needle and get measurable results on a handful. And then it'll develop its own gravity, right? People will get attracted to it. What do you think about that?
I absolutely agree, because as wrong as it is, like to what we call in Germany, like to try to shower without getting wet, which you do when you're just doing something like an IT-based approach. You want digitalization, but you do not want to disrupt business too much. You just want to do this on the IT level. In the end, you basically get nothing. The same thing is happening basically when you want to do that pivot too harsh, and you really want to try to do everything different or to be better in everything and so on. First at all, this is something which quite often is a huge undertaking, which takes too long. Yeah, and if you want to talk, for example, in that aspect of a transition, those are, for example, the customers who say, like, let's throw everything away, let's do a full-on greenfield, we will start from a white paper again. And by this, sometimes they find out that they are taking so long, because it's just a lot of work to pull all these kinds of levers, that in the end, yeah, their goals and what and the strategy, what they were thinking is basically out of date anymore anyway. So it's a very good idea also, like for time saving reasons, to say like, what are, let's say, that the three things, the three capabilities I need concerning my strategy, or for example what I learned in the last 18 months of the crisis. What are the things that I have to be able to do? And one of the capabilities, for example, that pretty works out in that aspect, and it's really a huge win, because digitalization can make you better in that, is, for example, insight to action. Like on the one hand, exactly knowing what your situation is, knowing where you are. But this is just the first step, because just like bad news don't help you. Yeah, if I tell you bad news, then you say thank you very much, but what shall I do now? And digitalization, and if you're talking about S/4HANA or all the analytics system, they help you by bringing these kind of news into a process where you are automatically guided by the systems to a possible solution. So it's not something like in the past where you had your exception list and you were told like, look, there you have not enough stock and there you have other bad news. And then you were left alone to find a solution for this, and the systems and the applications did not give you the proper tools for it because you had to do it manual. Now you get help, which is intelligent processes which help you to put insight into action. And this is one, for example, of the capabilities that, and this belongs to my third top three of the top three best practices. Do this capability-based approach. Do what you say, concentrate on the things that are relevant, and go via the capabilities into measurable goals that you can also in the end measure and benchmark if you are better now or not.
Right. No, it's a good point. And to add on to your point about sometimes the bad news, I'll tell you that many times the first wave of output from these digitalization initiatives is a lot of bad news. And it's not so bad, right? At least you know where you are, right? I'll give you a funny example, not so funny, but large airline, household name, right? Passenger airline, household name, global company, multi-billion-dollar enterprise. Basically, most of airlines run on a razor thin margin. Most of the money they make goes right out the door in procurement spend. So if they bring in 30 billion, like 29 goes out in procurement spend. And they wanted to optimize that procurement spend. So if they could save just a few percent off of that, that's hundreds of millions of dollars and more. And so they pursued some digitalization initiative. They knew they had a lot of what they called rogue spend. And so, okay, comes back the data. And of that 29 billion in spend, basically, 25 of it is coming back categorized as other. And the remaining 4 billion is in its appropriate category of equipment and whatever, IT spend and so on. But if it's all in a category, most of your spend is just classified as other, you have a big data entry problem that you need to fix before you could even know where this spend is coming from. Like they don't even know where is it coming from. And it becomes a real eye opener of, wow, we thought we were going to get the output out of this to start fixing it. And now we can't even fix it. We know we have a data cleanup issue and a data entry issue and a categorization of spend issue before we even know where the real problem is. And nobody wants to know that bad news, but I guess you can't start fixing without it,
Absolutely. And it was interesting what you said, because I also have an example which was quite recent, like actually last week, because every company which is actually producing, manufacturing something, they have safety stocks, yeah, because they have these kinds of, let's say, level where they say I have to level out either my production or I have to be prepared when my demand is rising, for example. So I need safety stock. The problem though is, like, if you want to have a discussion with people from your customer and you really want to go into, let's say, emotional topics, you can start to discuss about safety stocks, because that's something what they grab on, like it's a parachute. Yeah, if you try to say, like, for example, is this kind of safety stock really necessary at that huge level? Because remember, all your liquidity is in these kinds of safety stocks and so on. And it's really difficult if you do not have these kinds of transparency that you were talking about, about these kinds of topics, because just in many cases, just the existence of it justifies the existence. Yeah, because it is there, so probably there's a reason for it. And you almost never talk fact based on it because you did not have the facts. Now, for example, there are so many possibilities. If you are digitalized, if you have these kinds of data-driven intelligence working with you, SAP, for example, calls it demand-driven replenishment, then the system can really check for you what you need, what kind of stocks you need in which area, and the system does it on a daily basis for you. So it frees a huge amount of liquidity for you, that especially now things, since let's say times are a little bit volatile and weird, you need all the liquidity that you have to be safe and survive definitely for the next month. So this is something which is also really huge benefit.
No, you see a lot of organizations still using some of that old demand planning methods of like the square root of the number of nodes is how much stock you should have. And it's just a kind of a very straightforward algorithm, but it doesn't take into any account the dynamic nature of things, velocity through the supply chain and how much you really need stage. Maybe it's more, maybe it's less. So actually measuring that, back to kind of come in full circle, is the key to understanding if those old 20, even 50-year-old metrics that we used to use when we did it on paper, can we get any better than that? And in many cases, certainly you can, especially when things are perishable, right?
Absolutely. And since you say that, I had 2 weeks ago, I've met with some former colleagues of mine where I started my career like almost 20 years ago, and we discussed about, and this was really interesting, when we were like junior consultants, many of these kind of projects that we did were, for example, like stock improvement projects, where we were giving something like a report of the data, how much inventory is there, and to do inventory optimization, we then calculated and so on what would be the perfect inventory level at which area. Was it right or wrong what we did at that time? In a certain way, it was wrong, because the data we were working on and the recommendation we gave was probably already outdated at the moment we did that, because we did something as a one-time improvement, as a project, which should be a process, which should be ongoing all the time. And this is now something that is possible, that can be done, and that's what there are lots of functionalities and capabilities of modern systems, like for example S/4HANA, that actually do these kinds of things. So what was used to be a one-time optimization as a project has now turned out to be a process, because it should be that way. And this is just
and
one
maybe
of
that's the fourth point we could add in between our three, and we'll add this as a joint fourth one, is that this is a process. This is not, let's run it, we get the numbers, we'll change this and change that and declare victory and go home. No, this is a process of continual improvement, an iterative cycle where we're going to, measure, improve, measure again, improve again, refine, adapt, and constantly go through this cycle on an ongoing basis. And you really can do it across the enterprise. Of course, you can do it in some of those commoditized process, closing, invoice approval, this type of thing, of course. But you could do it on the manufacturing side, what we just spoke about. You could do it in all the preventative maintenance and all the plant maintenance side as well, right? Am I getting my notifications satisfied in my preventative maintenance? Can I know that, hey, these robots need to have the oil changed every 3 months, and now I don't have to wait for a failure or a notification from the equipment. I can proactively go out and service that equipment in the field, therefore keep it up longer and so on. Then the alternative, which is go out, do the meter reading. Oh, it's time to change the oil, and then you take it down and change your oil. This is the old way of doing plant maintenance. And I think, I know SAP, when they talk about digitalization, one of their favorite examples is plant maintenance, how they can optimize plant maintenance. And it's a great area to optimize. We also like to optimize customer experiences, right? Warranties, things like this. But the point is that it's really, across the enterprise.
Absolutely. And the good thing is that the field of possibilities is so huge that it's not something that probably where you say like this is a thing which will be done within the next 3 years, yeah, and then we have to find a complete different field of optimization. No, it's huge. And I also have, and this is something what's very important to me, and maybe to say, I have made the experience, and this is my opinion, maybe you can relate to it. There's something what is called, and this is not something I invented. I think I read it in a book by, I think, Omar Bush. It was like that. It was called the trapped value gap. And this concept was really eye-opening for me, because the trapped value gap means that you have, or the most players in this game, the most adopters of digitalization, they just do what they have to do or what they need to do to, for example, be able, for example, to migrate on the next steps and so on, but not necessarily more than they have to do. So that means that they're always just at the minimum level of possibilities they could like win out of digitalization. Why the possibilities? They are like an exponential function. Yeah, they are huge, and there by this gap is appearing of trapped value which is not leveraged by most of the players. So this means if there is like one or two who say like, I want more, I want to achieve more than what 80%, 90% are actually doing, they can quite easily, by adopting, for example, the best practice we were discussing about, themselves on a position between what is possible and what most of the players do, which really gives them a leap ahead of their competition and so on. And this is, for example, something which I'm very thrilled about, because the opportunities now to do things new, to do things different, to have success in basically every and each industry is enormous. And this is something which also will be quite interesting in the next years.
Now, take S/4HANA, for example. I know SAP has invested a lot in trying to bring some of these technologies user ready into the product. And I know they did some of this with the digital boardroom and procurement dashboarding and so on. In your experience, how beneficial is some of that canned stuff, that out of the box stuff, in this journey? Is it helpful in the beginning? Is it helpful throughout? Is it not helpful at all? What are you seeing out there?
This is a good question. I think it's a bit heterogeneous. There are, of course, things which you can out of the box suddenly use. The digital boardroom, I would not consider it to be one of it, because this is something where you also really have to put a lot of input into it, so it really works and makes sense for you. But what I learned is that, and I think this is something that nothing really changes, not a RISE with SAP offering by SAP or anything else. Digitalization is not an on switch. You cannot install a software or install an application or buy a service and suddenly you are digitalized and so on. It's not that easy. You still have to put a lot of, let's call it, unartificial intelligence into it to fully leverage the possibilities you have there, which means, and this is like most the case, that there are people who have to come together and really have to use best practices, or these, let's say, best practice approaches, and adopt them in their approach and make it happen. And all the other things, they are tools, they are helper, they give you inspiration for it and so on. But in the end, it's still the person, the human, that has to make it happen. And as such, I'm still absolutely convinced that those things, they help. But in most of the cases, you really have to make them still work for you, and to give your individuality into it. So they are really the tool and the helpers that you need in that case.
And how important is it to have all of your data, either in one system or harmonized, or at least with some kind of similarity to get believable and valuable metrics out of it? Is that a key kind of enabling technology to this journey?
Absolutely, and I think they are one of the biggest potentials still in there, because in a certain way, digitalization, this is not new. This is something which already is happening since the beginning. Like let's call it like 40 years ago, when we start to work with software, with computer, to manage our production, is that everything what you have in a system in a certain way is a digital twin. And maybe we just talk about digital twins now since maybe like 3 to 5 years, and we started like to talk 3 to 5 years ago, but already the moment when you are putting parameters, for example, for the capacities of a certain machine into the system, that's what also something what you could do 20 years ago. You are generating a digital twin. And there are, of course, digital twins now are far more developed, and they are far more detailed, and they have much more parameters, and the reality is much more into them than, of course, 20 years ago, when there was still a little bit, let's call it, clumsy. But to have data and to have a kind of single source of truth and harmonization and so on is still one of the biggest win in that aspect. And there, from my opinion, is a huge potential in there, which is still not at far leverage. Because if you see like the most valuable companies today are companies who have their value in their data. Yeah, with Google, with Facebook, and so on. Data has become money, and we have to make this kind of money work for us. And that means that we should at least, or we should put as much effort and time and spend also in it than we do with our applications.
Well, I'm so glad you didn't say data is the new oil, because I'm tired of hearing that. But I certainly get the point. Yeah, a lot to be said there, and certainly, it's a journey. I believe also, yes, transformation is an enabling technology to that. We talk to customers all the time that have their data in multiple systems, 5 systems, 157 systems, and anywhere in between. And how is it that you can get a consistent view of that digital twin if it's spread across 5 to 157 different systems? And the answer is really you can't. So many of them, when we talk to people, S/4HANA, for example, why is it you really want to go to S/4HANA? What's the first example? Oh, we're worried about support. And I'll tell them, okay, don't worry. You're going to get support somewhere, even if you have to go to a third party or whatever. I wouldn't worry about that. And if that's your only reason to go, you probably shouldn't. And then maybe they start thinking about it a little more, and they start to come up with maybe better reasons, like, oh, I want to take advantage of all that advanced analytics. I want to become a digital business. Now we're getting somewhere. If that's the real reason, let's keep talking. But my data spread across 5 different systems, and I can't get a consistent view. Okay, so really what would benefit you is to take the data from those 5 systems, merge it into one, get the benefit of the performance out of the HANA database as well. And now when you do your analytics, it's looking at a consistent data set. The digital twin is whole, so to speak. To tie in our last discussion. Oh, Miranda's on. That means it's time to move up. But then when the data is consistently in one system, then really you can really unleash the power of the analytics.
Absolutely. And what you say now is again where we started, because what you say as your necessary motivation, what should be your motivation, is business stuff. It's not IT stuff. Yep. It is business stuff. Yeah, definitely.
True. Well, with that, I believe we're going to toss back to Miranda, who will take us through maybe some of the questions that have popped in and so on. Miranda?
Yeah, thank you guys. Great discussion. And you actually answered a couple questions that came in. So let me just flip this on. I know we are over on time, so I want to be conscious of everyone's quarter end as I pull, as we go through. So just make sure you mark your calendars for the last 2 sessions of the series. As you registered once, you are secure, your spot is secured for the rest of the series. So please mark your calendars and save the dates. And if you missed the previous sessions, you will be able to find those recordings on demand via the landing page that you registered through. With that, since we are over on time and we did answer those couple questions that came in, I would like to thank the audience for joining today. Up on the screen are our social media channels, so be sure to follow us on LinkedIn and Twitter for all up-to-date information on North America events that we are running. Alexander and Steele, thank you so much for your time today. This was a great and valuable discussion, and I hope the audience is able to take something away from that. All right. Well, everyone, you enjoy your rest of your Thursday. Have a happy quarter end, and we will see you for the next session.
Great. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Alex.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.